Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Ultimate Fashion History for an episode of That Dress. In this episode, I'd like you to put on your Sunday clothes because it only takes a moment to tell you about, yes, that dress. Irene Sharaff for Barbra Streisand in Hello, Dolly. This episode was suggested to me by Ultimate Fashion History Facebook group member Eric Coble. He is a very active and delightful member. Talk about a fan favorite. But Eric is also a ridiculously talented designer, dressmaker, and performance artist himself. Let me show you a bit of his work. Here is Eric's interpretation of designer Anthony Powell's Willie Scott costume for Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And there is the original. And here is Eric having some Rococo fun with this beautiful gown. Speaking of Anthony Powell, we'll be talking about that designer's incredibly detailed and beautiful costumes for Death on the Nile in a UFH coming soon. But we're here to talk about that dress. So Eric, thank you so much for such a brilliant suggestion. As I just mentioned, that dress comes from Hello, Dolly, 1969, starring Barbra Streisand, of course, Walter Matthau, and a very young Michael Crawford. It is said to be one of the last big Hollywood musicals, the very last one, in fact. It almost bankrupted 20th Century Fox. It was so unbelievably expensive. Fox were trying to duplicate the success they had had in 1965 with The Sound of Music, but of course times had really changed in that 4 years between The Sound of Music and Hello, Dolly's 1969 release, and it wasn't quite as well received as Fox had hoped. There is a ton of really interesting and fun trivia and factoids about Hello, Dolly, and I'll touch upon some of them a bit later on, but we're here first to talk about that dress, designed, of course, by the legendary Irene Sharaff. Irene Sharaff, of course, was a legendary designer for both Broadway and Hollywood, although around Hollywood she was known as the Black Widow. She was a very nice person, but an incredibly demanding person when it came to her work, and really wanted everything her own way. But who else is a demanding perfectionist who wants everything their own way? Don't say me, even though that's true. No, I'm talking about Barbra Streisand. How did these two divas get along? Well, apparently very well. They understood each other. They understood how important it was to get everything right. Irene was very sympathetic to actors and really worked with them. It was directors and choreographers she had a problem with, evidently. But of course, Irene and Barbra had already worked together just a couple of years earlier on Funny Girl, where Irene designed this beautiful dress in gold for Barbra. And of course, Irene was no stranger to working with gold, because of course she designed the costumes for Cleopatra. And there is Elizabeth Taylor looking fabulous in gold. So by the time she got around to working on Hello, Dolly, Irene was very experienced with gold and how it would work and how it would photograph on screen, which is why she demanded that Barbra Streisand's gown in the Harmonia Gardens scene of Hello, Dolly be made with real gold. Because we all love to see the evolution of an iconic dress, here is the original costume sketch for the gold Harmonia Gardens gown. Here is the actual dress, and here is Barbra making that legendary entrance down the crimson red stairs of Harmonia Gardens. And please note, there is a train on her dress. We'll be discussing that in a little bit. Evidently, it was Barbra's idea that the dress be gold. I can imagine it was Barbra's insistence that the dress be gold, knowing the wonderful Barbra Streisand as we do. And the reason for this is because she didn't want any comparisons between her Dolly Levi and Carol Channing's, who of course wore that wonderful red dress in the original Broadway production. Now, when Barbra was cast, there were many people who were not only disappointed, but rather cross that Carol Channing wasn't cast. She had created the role after all. And so Barbra very cleverly really wanted to distance her performance and the way that she looked in the movie from the way that Carol Channing looked on Broadway. Interestingly, though, Bette Midler in the recent revival didn't seem to have those concerns. And I think that's kind of interesting, because if you look at Carol Channing and you look at Bette Midler, they really look so very similar. I wonder if Bette Midler objected to having a gold dress because she didn't want to be compared to Barbra Streisand. Anyway, all three of these ladies made wonderful dollies, in my opinion, but more of that later. The idea of having a gold dress was very well received by everyone involved: Gene Kelly, the director, the art director, choreographer, Michael Kidd, and Irene Sharaff, because film is different to stage, and the gold would stand out so much better against that crimson carpet of the Harmonia Gardens. Let's take a look at how the dress was constructed. It has shoulder straps, as you can see, a fitted bodice, fitted hips, a pleated peplum, and then a long central panel. There is almost 1 pound of gold thread used here, along with hundreds of Swarovski crystals and other 14-karat gold detail. It was the most expensive dress ever made for a movie, but it isn't just the cost of the gold itself that made it so expensive, it is the work that went into it. I'm going to zoom in, and hopefully this is clear enough for you to see the intricate detail that went into this embroidery. All of those swirling Art Nouveau shapes, all of those crystals, those little starbursts. Evidently the gold thread was sort of tubular, and you could thread it around like beads. Absolutely superb. This is the sort of embroidery and beadwork you would expect to find in the 18th century in the court of Marie Antoinette or something, isn't it? It really is extraordinary that such minute detail and such richness of artistry went into a gown that you don't actually see up close in the movie. Here's a lovely picture of Barbra, but I'm showing it so you can see how these gold threads really were worked like beads. Look at that detail on the shoulder there. And of course, that gold thread was employed to make that wonderful choker. And of course, this dress had its own shoes to accompany. And here they are, each worked with those same sumptuous materials and that high level of artistry. At the time, in 1960s money, the gold thread alone came in at $8,000. The entire ensemble, including craftsmanship, came in at $53,472, which in today's money is about $100,000, which made it the most expensive dress ever created for a movie. But money well spent. Here is another picture of lovely Barbra, and just look at how sumptuous this is, how rich this gown is. I'll do another extreme close-up so you can see the level of work and time and effort and money that went into this gown. But of course, with the gold and the crystals and the rhinestones, this was a very heavy dress. In fact, it weighed 40 pounds. Imagine a 1 pound bag of sugar. Poor Barbra had to kick-step, sing, and throw herself around the Harmonia Gardens wearing, essentially, 40 pounds of sugar. Imagine that. I actually think that domino sugar dress looks quite good, and if you think packaging is a dumb idea for the runway, take it up with Moschino. Nobody is ever going to wear a Hershey bar dress, and it's such a shame because that dress is so beautifully tailored. Imagine how wonderful it would look in black. But let's not start one of my rants. Let's get back to that dress. Right, so remember I said note the train on the dress. We'll be talking about it later. There you can see it again as Barbra makes her iconic descent into Harmonia Gardens. Well, during rehearsals, Streisand wore a muslin version of this dress, and the dancers kept stepping on the train, and she couldn't dance in the train. The choreographer, Michael Kidd, did not get along with Irene Sharaff and said to Irene, "Barbra can't kick in the dress," to which Irene Sharaff evidently replied, "Well, take out the kicks." Although Dolly makes her grand entrance in the gown with a train, by the time she's dancing with the waiters, her train has mysteriously disappeared. I wonder how many people noticed at the time. I certainly didn't until I started noticing clothes and talking about them and making these videos. But yes, the train is there and then it disappears. I don't know if it reappears when she sings So Long Dearie to Walter Matthau, with whom she did not get along at all. After this number, I've never noticed, have you? It has been said that this gown is historically anachronistic. These fitted hips were out of style at the turn of the century, in 1900, which is when Hello Dolly is set, and that by the time we reach the turn of the century, skirts were full at the hip, like this beautiful gold gown from about 1901. This is absolutely true. It has also been said that Dolly's dress here is far more reminiscent of clothing in the 1880s with this fitted hip. Now certainly this is true, but a couple of things to consider here. Dolly Levi is supposed to be a middle-aged lady, and who's to say that she didn't still cling on to the fashion ideas of her youth? But more importantly, take a look at this. This is Camille Clifford, the Gibson girl come to life at the turn of the century, and look at the way her gown is fitted. Completely fitted in the hips. So listen, let's take this Camille Clifford gown, make it a kind of gold color, add those shoulder straps and shoulder details, give it that lovely trim and that choker, and basically she's Dolly Levi. So I don't think that Irene Sharaff's costume here or throughout the movie is in any way historically anachronistic. I think it's an interpretation of turn of the century costume. Yet the biggest criticism leveled at Hello Dolly is Barbra herself. People said that she was wrong for the role, that she was too young for the role. Even Barbra Streisand says she was too young for the role. She was 25-ish when filming started, and of course she was playing Dolly Levi, a middle-aged widow. Other actresses who were considered for the role were Elizabeth Taylor. I think she would have been quite terrific. As we all know, Elizabeth Taylor was very funny, had great comic timing, but of course she doesn't sing, and so she didn't get the role. Others who were considered, Shirley MacLaine, she would have been fun, but again, too young. And Julie Andrews, who I personally think would have been quite wrong for the role, even though she seems to nail everything that she puts her hand to. One person who was never considered for the role was Carol Channing, who of course had originated the role on Broadway. Fox felt she wasn't a big enough box office draw, and that she didn't have the screen presence to carry such a big movie. Well, anyone who has seen her delightful cameo in Thoroughly Modern Millie would know that this isn't true. And can I please do my imitation of Carol Channing in Thoroughly Modern Millie? Raspberries. That's the only imitation I can do. I think Carol Channing, of course, would have been the ideal person to play Dolly, but I love Barbra Streisand's performance here. Yes, she was too young to play a middle-aged eccentric, but she does it quite convincingly. I think she's funny, delightful, demented, and I can't imagine the movie Hello Dolly with anyone but Barbra. Irene Sharaff was nominated for an Oscar for her work on Hello Dolly, and I really think she should have won. She lost out, however, to Margaret Furs for her really excellent costumes for Anne of the Thousand Days. I should do that as an Ultimate Fashion History fave film fashion, shouldn't I? Okay, a little bit of trivia. The set for the Harmonia Gardens scene where Dolly makes her entrance in that dress was the most expensive set ever built. It was 3 stories high. It borrowed some pieces from other movies. A lot of the Von Trapp house from The Sound of Music is in this set. But then elements from the Harmonia Gardens set were used in other films. They were recycled. This fountain you see here on the left was used in The Towering Inferno. That's the only still I could find that features the fountain. And you may remember in The Towering Inferno, the bartender ties himself to the fountain at the end when the water tanks explode. And speaking of The Towering Inferno, oh yes, it features in an episode of Fave Film Fashion, here on the Ultimate Fashion History. So what happened to that dress? Well, it was bought by Debbie Reynolds for her Hollywood Costume Museum, and my goodness, we all have to thank Debbie Reynolds for salvaging and saving these iconic costumes. And there it is in her museum with the shoes right next to the roller skate rag dress from Funny Girl. I don't know if that is the dress that Barbra herself wore or one of the other roller skating dancers, but there it lived for a while until, of course, the Debbie Reynolds Costume Museum started to flounder and she had to sell off and auction off a lot of the stuff, including that dress, which sold at auction in 2011 for $125,000. Yet my favorite dress in Hello Dolly isn't the gold number. It's this beautiful lavender mauve dusty rose chiffon number that Barbra wears at the very end. Isn't it gorgeous? Anyway, Hello Dolly is one of those movies that has actually become less popular over the decades. I think it only has a rating of about 40% on Rotten Tomatoes, which I think is absolutely appalling. It's one of my favorite movies, and it's delightful, and it's joyful, and the music is wonderful. However, there was a little bit of resurgence of appreciation in Hello Dolly in 2008, especially with children, because, as you may remember, the music from the movie was used to great effect along with clips from the movie in the 2008 Disney Pixar sensation, Wall-E. And you'll remember that watching Hello Dolly taught him what being in love was all about. Adorable. Time for a familial plug. As many of you know, my dad, David Wolfe, is a paper doll artist in his retirement. Paper Dollywood is the name of his website, and he features Barbra in this dress along with her other iconic Dolly costumes in his paper doll book, Stars of Song. He also did a very good rendering of Barbra here. For fun, he once did an Irene Sharaff paper doll. I believe this is available on his website as well. I love the way he focused on that iconic profile of hers. And in the interest of fairness, he also has a Carol Channing paper doll. Raspberries! And while we're plugging, let me plug UFH. Of course, if you haven't seen it yet, I do feature Barbra at a later point in her career as a 20th century style icon in that series on the UFH. Well, there's been no Blue Monday in this episode of UFH, has there? You can contact me through my website, amandahallay.com. Join our Facebook group. Meet Eric, who inspired this video, and so many others. We have over 2,000 members over there now. And oh, what a great fun place it is. Check out our publishing company, Dean Street Press. Browse through our titles. We have so much good stuff over there. I'll be back very soon with another episode on the Ultimate Fashion History. So just click the little circle to subscribe. As always, thanks for watching, and don't go home until you fall in love. Bye for now.